All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Gloria Wu, President of Opening Doors PTA. Welcome to our webinar. Our topic today is on executive functions. Now, we all know people who are smart and intelligent, but for whatever reasons, their intelligence is not reflected in their performance, whether it is job performance or academic performance. In the school environment, we think about kids, they have good IQ, but they just have a hard time with finishing their work, doing their assignments, writing their essays, turning in their homework. And oftentimes it's not a lack of intelligence, but poor executive functioning skills, the skills we need to be productive in life. And as you will learn today, it's really important to start working on those skills early when our kids are little. Our speaker today is Nguyen. She is a board-certified behavior analyst and a licensed marriage and family therapist. And she specializes in providing behavior therapy to kids with special needs. I know Han very well. She worked with my son Ryan when he was little during those very challenging early years. And I've always been so grateful to her for her passion to help families with special needs. So Han, I'm going to turn the time over to you. Thank you so much.
I thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you for taking the time, to be here today, and then kind of just listen to kind of, what I love doing. This is actually my first time talking about executive function for our younger kids. If I don't know if you guys are aware that I also co-teach an executive functioning workshop for our middle school group, and with one of my really good friends who's a speech pathologist. And when we were teaching that class, we realized that there's a huge struggle now that we're in distance learning, right? So these kids and these families, the pandemic kind of came about on us where none of us were prepared. And they're forgetting to sign into their Zoom classes. They're not turning in assignments. They're not waking up on time. And it's a huge struggle. So then I was just thinking, these skills need to be taught. They need to be taught at a much younger age. So I was looking at a lot of research on executive functioning skills, and it really, opened my eyes that these skills are taught as early as 6 months old. And so it's like a huge eye opener. So unless you have, you're in the field and you're familiar with child development, no one really tells you about these things. You bring home a newborn and you're making sure your child's happy, your child's well fed, but then no one's talking about like working memory, self-control, and all of that. And it's such a huge part of development that we should really be focusing on. So I reached out to Gloria and I said, hey, is it possible for us to kind of just discuss something like this, for parents with children from 0 to 5. How can we just to open that door for everyone? I personally have 2 kids, a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old. And my 4-year-old was diagnosed with autism about 6 months ago. And I really had to fight for that diagnosis because I work with her every day and I see the struggle, and girls tend to typically be underdiagnosed. She's pretty high functioning, but I do see like little quirks in there and tended to be forgetful, not really listening well. So I put a lot of work into it. And so I work with both of them together. And I realized how effective it was and how much it made my life so much easier. I'm not cleaning after my kids anymore. So I'm here today kind of teach you about these skills and kind of open the door and letting you know how important executive functioning is. And, it's never too early to start. I get parents with, kids who are post-secondary, and they ask me that too, like, should we have done this earlier? And it's never too late to get started. Okay, so I'm assuming that everyone who is here have kids who are between 0 to 5, but if you don't, that's okay. Again, it's never too late to start. Okay. So let's get started. So let me share my screen. Okay. Let's start from the beginning. Okay. All right. So I'm not able to see anyone's questions or comments, and but Gloria's gonna help me
Yes, I'm gonna
monitor all
monitor.
that.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So what is executive function? I'm just gonna call it as EF. Okay. So this is a really important set of skills that we use every single day. So EF skills combine the motor, the sensory, communication, and cognitive skills that we've developed. At a very young age, we apply this combination of skills to daily activities and situations such as playing, learning, and socializing. So overall, they really help us accomplish important things and to really achieve new goals, right? So they allow us to focus, to plan, to accomplish tasks, impulse control, and manage emotions. So they also support mental and physical health, healthy relationships, and success in school. So that's a lot going on in there. And you're probably imagining like, how do I even teach a child, between 0 and 5 these skills? We'll talk about that later on. So before we really explain or explore ways to support your baby's EF development, let's really take a closer look at what it really is. Okay, so EF includes 3 types of interrelated brain function, and that's working memory. This is your ability to use and keep information. And then there's mental flexibility, is the ability to sustain attention and shift gears. And there's self-control, which is the ability to prioritize choices, to resist temptations, and to think before speaking or acting, right? You guys, if you ever met a middle schooler or high schooler, this is really challenging for them. They don't really think before they act. Right? So what do they do? So these 3 functions together, they work together to help us. Okay, so they help us initiate, so beginning a task and generate ideas. They help us plan, so mapping out how to accomplish present and future tasks, to organize, so place objects in our physical space in a functional way, right? So all the books go on the bookshelf, the dishes go in the cabinet, and so on. They help us become more self-aware, and that self-monitoring also play a part to help us adjust our behavior according to situation and to really understand the effects of our behavior. And then last is to control emotions. So using rational thoughts to manage our emotions. Okay, so it's a lot going on there. I'm just going to give you guys a brief one. I know in our middle school workshop, we really go into detail on each of these specific categories. Okay, so okay, so how does it relate to child development? So EF is really not present at birth. The babies are born with the potential to acquire it, and ages 0 to 5 is really a critical time to lay its foundation. Our genes provide the blueprint for learning these skills, and they develop through experiences and practice. So this time in your baby's life is really a fertile ground because her brain is being shaped by her experiences. Okay, so EF is about functional skill. Over the years, I realized how teaching functional skills is so important. Um, we tend to have like a huge focus on academics, which is really important. However, with a lack of EF skills, your child can be one of the best reader, but if he or she isn't able to attend, sit in a classroom, attend and pay attention to what the question the teacher is asking, it kind of just defeats the whole purpose. They can't generalize those skills beyond that. So functional skills so important. These are skills that help us with daily routines, with schoolwork, friendships, working, playing, the list go on. So with EF, we take what we know and we find a practical and important ways to use those skills. Okay, so let me give you an example. So as a child, we learn how to use the light switch, right? We learn how light switch works. So the way of apply that information to help us in these situation or environments, such as knowing how to use a light switch in a different room or a different house, and then how to figure out different types of light switches, right? There's some where you hit up and down to turn on and off, but there's some where you have to slide it to on and off. So using information that we have learned to solve problems is a really important part of EF skills. Okay, so these skills typically develop most rapidly between ages 3 to 5. And then it follows another spike in development during the adolescent and early adult years. So it takes a long time. Okay, it takes a lot of practice to develop them. But as children's EF skills grow, adults can gradually allow children to manage more and more aspects of their environment. So one reason why we see so many middle and high schoolers struggle with EF skills is because these basic foundations were not laid out for them early on. So some kids are more resilient, so they pick up things quicker. But for most, it's a huge struggle, and it's really evident during distance learning as we see it now. A lot of our kids are struggling. Um, Lots of families are struggling in supporting their kids because you look at these working memories, self-control and all this stuff. It's like, where do you even start? You know, so it's a little bit easier to begin these steps when your child's younger, rather than being very overwhelmed at this point. Okay. Some of the things I've listed were like working memories, so following rules of a game, mental math, completing chores in order, remembering story details, and then that sense of self-control is being able, raising your hand in class rather than blurting out the answer, right? Waiting in line, doing work undistracted, and sharing toys. And then the mental flexibility is switching from play to mealtime, to that transition phase, solving a math problem, making up a story, handling change or new experiences. That tends to be very difficult for a lot of us, no matter how old you are. Okay, so what does the research says for, what does it say for young children? So in the past, many researchers thought that the functioning of young children's brains was much like little adults. They could reason and plan ahead, but just not as effectively as adults. However, new research is coming out and is showing that this may not be the case. So instead, young children's brains actually function quite differently, especially in regards to skills like planning ahead. So there's this study, University of Colorado. They conducted a very creative study to understand how young children, I believe the kids were around 3 years old. Okay, how they follow directions compared to older kids who are 8 years old. So they compared 3 year olds to 8 year olds, and they set up a very simple computer game involving a set of rules. So when a picture of a character is presented, the character was from Blue's Clues was presented, was followed by a picture of a watermelon. Okay, so whenever a watermelon shows up right after a character from Blues, the child was told to press a happy face button. Okay, and then when any other character appear, such as SpongeBob, they were told to press the sad face button. Okay, so by doing this, researchers they use a device to measure the child's eye activity to determine how much mental effort is used to complete the task. Okay, so what they found was that older children had exert little mental effort to do this task because they could anticipate, what picture was coming up next. Okay, but for preschoolers, however, they have to use more effort to think about which button to push in response to the game. They just couldn't think ahead what was coming up next. Okay, so they had to consciously think back to the character they had just seen instead of being able to anticipate the future. Okay. So, with this research shows why EF skills activities for preschoolers are so important. They need practice with these skills in order for them to become second nature, right? We can't just expect them to just know it. So, what does this mean for parents with a preschoolers? So, um, as the researchers point out, this study seems to indicate that parents shouldn't expect preschoolers to think ahead, right? For example, to bring a coat to go outside, even when you're telling them in advance to bring it because it's cold. Okay. By you repeating this type of information and over, it probably won't help for such young children. Okay. So while preschool is probably listening to you, they're hearing you, their brain just really doesn't retrieve this information until it becomes immediately needed. They're like immediately when they step outside and they realize it's cold, then it clicks for them that they need that jacket. Okay. So for a lot of us, we're questioning, like, I'm telling them to put on their jacket constantly, and they keep forgetting. Well, we have to think about the development and their age and how their brain works. So it just really takes practice. And practicing in the moment is very important for our younger ones. Okay, sorry, I need to take a drink. My throat's getting dry. Okay. Okay. So how can you help develop and improve EF skills? Okay, so laying the groundwork for EF skill will really help your baby to really help give them the best shot at mental and physical health, to help them with healthy relationships and success in school and later on in the workplace. Right. So research has even shown that EF is a better predictor of academic success than IQ. Yeah, that says a lot. Um, for EF skills, however, it takes years to develop in children. As parents, we can do things to help our children develop these skills. Um, these are just some activities. I have my email at the end of this presentation. If you guys need more ideas, feel free to send me an email. I'll be more than happy to provide a list. And these are things that I have done with my own children that I found very effective as well. Okay, so the first is when you want to encourage pretend play. So pretend play gives your baby endless opportunities to practice these EF skills as they organize objects, they plan, they complete tasks, they explore behavioral, emotional themes. The reason why I wanted to add the word unstructured in there is that so you can allow your child to lead the play rather than telling them what to do. So you're just mainly there to support their ideas and interests through that pretend play. Okay. The next one is to set aside time to play structured games. Okay. So the Harvard University Center, they recommended these type of EF promoting games for babies between 6 to 18 months. So playing peekaboo and patty cake is a great way to start this. For kids who are a little bit older, the freeze dance, you go on YouTube, you type in freeze dance, they have really great examples for you. And then Simon Says is another one for older kids to help support working memory and self-control. Okay, so there are hiding games that you can play that works with working memory. So you can start with simple versions like covering the toy with a blanket and letting your baby find it, and then make them more challenging as she matures. Okay, imitation games show your baby how to do something, and then waiting for her to copy you involves attention, working memory, and self-control. Okay, so this starts simply by actions like waving goodbye, become something more complex as she grows, and copying actions like placing rings on a stacking pool. So, there are endless opportunities to do this. So this is what I mean by when you start them early, these activities are much easier. Can you imagine doing these kind of things when your kids are like 8 years old? They're probably not going to be interested, right? So it gets harder, and so you have to be more creative. Okay, so start early. You're going to hear me say this a lot. Okay. Um, some other things that you can do, role playing games, right? So pretending to sweep the floor, feeding a stuffed animal, that really helps with that working memory, yeah, self control, and selective attention, right? Finger play can be like the itsy bitsy spider, to help support self control and working memory. Before the pandemic, when you're sending your children to preschool, they do a lot of these activities and in the classroom is because for those very reasons, introducing them to those early EF skills. But what a lot of teachers may not realize is that this is the reason why they're teaching those skills. But unfortunately, with the pandemic, our kids are at home. My 2-year-old, she gets so excited now that we're able to go to a park and she sees other kids. We have to maintain social distancing, but they're missing out on a lot of these activities that they should be getting when they're in school. So it's really up to us at home to create these situations, to create these scenarios so we can teach them. Okay. I know, a lot of research are starting right now on kids during the pandemic and how the effect of it as they're growing. So we're not going to see those research until years later. They'll be interested to know how that impacts our children as they're growing. Okay. The next one I have on here is reading. So it's really no big surprise that reading is helpful in developing EF functions, EF skills. So as kids grow and develop these skills, they can remember longer plots and more characters, right? So some books also teaches lessons around EF skills like waiting, turn taking, controlling your language. So, if you're searching for books, those are books that I would suggest getting. Okay. Um, okay. Let me move this here. So, some general principles for improving your child's EF skills. You know, the first one is I always like to reiterate that you want to be consistent. You want to have these warm interactions um, to help maintain and develop healthy childhood relationships. And it really helps set your child up for success in every area of her life. So your relationship with your baby not only helps shape her brain, but it also allows you to model EF skills, like how to behave in different situations and how to cope with stress, right? Because they see you every day. So you're going to be that role model for them, you know. And I always tell parents, when I'm doing therapy with parents, is that, when in doubt and you're just feeling so overwhelmed, just go ahead and, say, I need to step away now and walk away. Because remember, in those moments, your child is watching you. How you respond in that situation is what you're modeling to your kids. Okay. Um, is your child ready? You want to consider your child's developmental level. So, if that, for example, you do not want to expect a 5-year-old to perform a 20-minute chore, right? So meet them where they're at. What is their baseline right now, and how do you start to build up that skill? Okay. Teach the skills. So don't assume that your child will learn these skills on their own. You want to break the task down into smaller steps and you want to practice them. So you may say, put these dirty clothes in the laundry basket. And you have to model that for them. What does put dirty clothes mean? Is your child able to differentiate what's dirty and what's clean? Okay, so take all those little things into consideration. Okay. You want to make sure you set the stage. So change your child's environment. Use visual reminders when possible. Ongoing verbal cues may sound like nagging and it creates prompt dependency. So when my 2 4-year-olds are cleaning up their toys, there's a visual of which toys go into which container. So, you've ever sent your kids to preschool. Some preschools do this. I'll have a visual of all the bins and which toy goes in there. So by prompting your child to look at the picture, and if it's a block, that's where the block should be. It's better than you constantly providing those verbal prompts, put it away. Prompt dependency can be pretty dangerous over time because then your child will not do the task unless they hear your voice to prompt them. Lots of parents with middle schoolers, high schoolers come to me and say, I'm constantly nagging them to do this. It's probably because they're so used to that method. Okay. So you use visuals when possible. I use my timers all the time. I let my child know you have X amount of minutes before we gotta leave the park. And I really set it, I show it to her. I let her know 5 more minutes, you can go ahead and press start. So that way it's an easier transition for her because they don't know, they don't really have a concept of time. Okay. So anything that you have that's concrete is visual, the better it's gonna be. Okay. Um, the next one is establishing routines and schedules. So be prepared to modify and adjust the routine. You want to engage your child in these brainstorming process regarding how to improve the plan. So an example is my 4-year-old has a daily visual schedule. We don't use it every day. There's going to be time, if she's having a harder day, I will use that visual schedule for her. So I lay out all the expectations for the day. So I let her know today we need to read a book, we need to do a worksheet, we need to color, play a board game. We can throw in some snacks and playtime in there. So then we take turns choosing activities. So that way she has, in the end, she's going to have to do what the expectations are, but she has a choice in this. She has some autonomy to choose, what goes first and next and all of that. Okay, so um, another one is, no matter what, one rule that we have is before she leaves her playroom, she must put all her toys back where they belong. It doesn't have to be perfect, but if we're walking into a room and we don't have any toys all over the place, you can play what you want. Before we leave that playroom, it needs to be put back. So within this, if you know that you have something planned after and you got to leave right away, you got to come in and break that routine. Give her some time to clean up, make sure that you follow through with your expectations. Okay, so each night before we go upstairs and get ready for bed, both of my kids know that they have to put all the toys downstairs into the basket or the bin, whatever they use to put their toys in. you know and that's the expectations I set for them. And so in the beginning, it was a lot of hand over hand. It was a lot of support, it was a lot of visuals. And then I slowly fade out that support. And now, when they hear, hey, we're going to go upstairs, clean up your toys, immediately they'll do it. So it's a lot of effort to put in, but the reward is greater because then now you don't have to. So you notice that you're constantly cleaning after your kids. I really encourage you to start having them do it on their own. Okay. The next one is you want to reward their success. So provide praise and positive feedback. We're going to go into more detail on this a little later. Okay, so you want to seek advice from your child regarding proof for rewards. So you want to set up the contingency, okay, using first stand. That's something that I use all the time. First pick up 5 toys, put them away, and then you can have a snack. So just by me saying that and the child executing that, so many skills go into play, right? They have to listen, they have to attend to what I was asking them, and they have to follow that direction and they have to follow through with it. Right? That's a lot of skills in there. And I also added in there like the 5 toys to be more specific. Okay, but in the beginning, that's not always going to be the case. Okay, so again, going back to meet your child where they're at, you want to make sure that it's developmentally appropriate. Okay. Um, the next one, the last one I have on here is you want to withdraw support slowly. So this is going to take time. So once you notice that your child is starting to show some independency, you want to decrease the number of reminders and prompts. So if you have to do hand over hand to help your child put a toy away, that's okay. And that's probably what's expected in the beginning. Okay. The next time, the next 10, 15 times when you're asking your child put a toy away and you notice that she actually initiated on her own, that kind of tells you that, okay, she's ready for me to fade my prompt a little bit. Okay. So then, by feeding that prompt, instead of doing full hand over hand, this is my daughter's Valentine's toy. So if I'm telling her, to put the cat away, in the beginning, I would have to physically have her hold the cat. My hand is here, and to put the cat where it needs to be. So that's a full physical prompt, right? But over time, I notice she's picking it up on her own. That's great. So me feeding that prompt could be gently, holding her elbow and then kind of like nudging her where it should be. And that's how we feed away prompt. Feeding away prompt is so important. You have to carefully do this because, eventually you want your child to just be able to do it on their own. I have parents with older kids and they're constantly saying they don't do it unless I tell them to do it, or like I'm always nagging them. And it's probably because we haven't taken into consideration the prompt fading. Okay. Sorry, my 2-year-old's knocking on the door right now. Okay, so let's go to the next one. So how can I get my child to practice the skills, in this course or this discussion? Um, so, we're done with the EF part and some of the suggestions I've given you guys. I hope that it really, open your minds and kind of open that door for you to kind of get some of these activities in place. Now, what I've learned over time is that, these are things you've probably heard before in the past, but people don't really talk about how the behavior modification piece, okay? How do we get these things to be implemented and the child, gonna absorb those things that we're teaching them and how do they carry on? Well, this is the part, unless you have, friends who are behavior specialists, unless your child has services in some way, you're probably not going to hear things like this. And I just wish this is something that is being discussed everywhere. Behavior modification is so important and it's such an effective skill and knowledge to have. So I just want to give you guys a little piece of it. Okay, so so you want to make sure that kids are motivated to learn. Okay, so some kids are inherently motivated to learn. It's just part of their nature. They get excited to learn new things, but most of our kids don't. They're just not. Some kids do what their parents tell them to do, right? Even if they don't want to. Some kids don't care if it's not a highly preferred activity. And then there are kids who simply don't listen to their parents. So all of us will do something if we get a reward for doing it. Okay, so I'm going to go into more details about this. And I actually took this slide straight from our workshop with our middle schoolers because I just feel like it's so important. I make sure that parents are aware of this. Okay, so reinforces as motivation. So reinforcement is a key to increasing desired behavior. Okay, so that can be in the form of toys, video games, activities, food, money, or just simply positive attention from the individual. Okay, so when you're initially teaching a skill, you want to start with something that's immediate and frequent reinforcement. So what that means, I always try to pair my reinforcer with a phrase. I always combine together. So what I mean by reinforcement is you have to know your child. What is something that's going to really motivate them to get that task done? Okay, so it could be more than one that you have. So it's great if your child has more than one thing that they are motivated by. But I work with children when they're not motivated by anything, and it becomes harder, and that's where you may want to get feedback from a specialist on how to do that. Okay. So providing immediate access to a reinforcer is certainly effective, but it isn't always practical. Okay, so which responses and how often they should be reinforced will really depend on your child. So initially, when you're teaching a skill, you want to make sure you reinforce more often. But over time, you also need to fade away that reinforcer so you're not dependent on it. And that's where I always add a praise with it. Oh, you did a really good job putting your toys away. Here's an M&M, for example. Okay, so once your child is able to show the skill independently, this is where you begin to gradually provide reinforcer intermittently. So not reinforcing as often anymore. Okay, so for example, instead of providing the reinforcer after each correct response, you begin to provide the reinforcer on average of every third response, for example. Um, the eventual goal is for the naturally occurring consequences to maintain the learner's behavior. So what that means, you have to kind of observe once your child starts to show more independency and the behaviors become a part of their repertoire, then you kind of know that, this is so easy for them that they no longer need that reinforcement. They no longer need to be motivated. I don't need to give them something tangible anymore. Okay. So when I first started teaching my kids to clean up their toys, I know that M&Ms will most likely get them to comply, right? Because they don't get access to M&Ms all the time. It's only like special moments when they're doing a really great job. So I set up that contingency. So now I would say like first clean up your toys, then you can have 5 M&Ms. So over time it was 5, and then it went down to 3, and then to 2, and then to 1, and sometimes not at all. And that's okay because by this time it's already a part of the repertoire. And the task is no longer such an effort to perform for them. So it's just so easy for them to just clean up those toys and then move on to what you need to do. You know, um, some of you are probably, if this is your first time hearing something like this, you're probably a little bit confused why we need to, you know, provide a reinforcer. And if you really think about your life, everything you do in life, right? You're getting access to something or getting something being removed that is pretty aversive to you. So, if you think about it, why do you go to work? You go to work so you make money, right? If your boss tells you, hey, I'm not going to pay you anymore to go to work, do you think you're going to want to go to work anymore? Chances are you won't, right? And then think about in your car. If you're getting in your car and you're driving off and you didn't put on your seatbelt, right? What's going to happen? There's going to be some kind of beeping noises, and it's not going to go off until you put that seatbelt on. Okay. So by you putting that seatbelt on, what's reinforcing your behavior, what's going to reinforce your behavior at that time, or we call punishment procedure, but that's getting to the nitty gritty of it, is that you now will be able to remove that aversive noise by putting on your seatbelt. So you look around, everything in life goes back to behavior modification and the ideas behind it. So same with our children. If you want them to do something, you want them to learn a new skill, you've got to make sure that they're motivated by you giving them that reinforcer. So you're in control of that. Okay, so this discussion on its own is like a whole separate workshop, and even like functions of behaviors is a whole other thing that could have hours and hours that we can talk about. Okay, but I just want to make sure that I give you like the gist of it and kind of open that door for you. Okay, so reinforcer, it really varies across individuals. Okay, so what is reinforcing to me may not be reinforcing to you. All right, so never assume that typical reinforcing items will act as reinforcers for your child. Okay, I get parents all the time thinking that the iPad is a reinforcer for their children, but it turns out that it wasn't, because you assumed that your child may like that. So this is where you have to really read your child, what is it that makes them really happy? What is it that lights up their eyes, when you talk about it. Okay. So one of the best way to find out is, ask them if they're verbal to be able to communicate with you, or else give them choices between 2 or more items or activities that they would like to earn. My kids like, do you want Do you want 3 M&Ms or do you want 3 minutes of iPad time? Okay. So making sure that you also don't provide free access to these items. Because if your child is really motivated by the iPad and they're getting free access to the iPad, all day, and then by the time you're asking them to clean up their room to get the iPad, well, by then they may not care for it anymore because they've been getting it all day. And with food items as well, if they're constantly eating chips as their favorite thing, if you're constantly giving them chips as a reinforcer, well, by the end of that bag of chips, they're probably so full already that chips won't be the maintaining reinforcer anymore. So you have to, it's best to have multiple reinforcers, but don't give them access to it. Nothing is for free, basically. I always tell parents, have them work for it, okay? Because by the time they're middle school, high schools, or, they get to look for their first job, that's where these ideas are so important. It comes into play. There's a reason why you need to go work to get money so you can buy that new video game that you always wanted to buy. I'm not always going to be your bank account. So it's easier to teach them these values when they're younger. Okay. And with our younger kids, 0 to 5, is through that tangible, is through that toy, or, it could be that praise or that one-on-one attention from an adult that they really like. Okay. So reinforcers need to be effective. So the truth of the matter is that if reinforcement is not provided at any level at all, the desired behaviors will eventually stop occurring. Okay. Because as far as the learner, as far as your child is concerned, if there's no payoff for engaging in the behaviors, then they won't do anymore. Right. So think about you too. You stop getting paid for doing something, chances are you're not going to be motivated to learn, to continue to put effort into it. Right. Speaking of effort, so if a task requires more effort, that's where the reward has to be bigger. Okay. If it's a little effort, then minimize it. If I notice my kids are cleaning up their toys on their own without me telling them, that's where I come in with like a party for them. Wow, I can't believe you clean up your room all by yourself. You know what? I'm going to give you 3 M&Ms and you also get 5 minutes of iPad. So I want to make sure I acknowledge that, and especially anything that they're doing on their own. Okay. All right. So the question I get asked often by parents and educators is, isn't rewarding the behavior a form of bribery? So there's similarities, but there's also huge differences between the two. And it's how you deliver that reinforcement. Okay. So, when the child only do it unless they get something out of it, it's something parents always ask me. If I'm giving them the chocolate, well, wouldn't they learn that they'll only do it if they get the chocolate? Well, the clear difference between the two is that if reinforcement isn't done correctly, it's possible that you may find yourself in a situation when the child only performed the behavior unless being rewarded for it. So let's really look at the difference between the two. Okay, in bribery, the child is in control of the tangible or anything motivating for that. Okay, but with positive reinforcement, you're in control of that. You get to determine when you can deliver that reinforcement. Okay. And bribery, offering that item or activity to try to stop or influence behavior in the moment. So I see this all the time at the grocery store. And there's a reason why, this is go back to, that behavior concept. There's a reason why at the checkout section is where they put all the little trinkets of toys, all the chocolates and all the, those goodies. There's a reason why they have it there, right? Because your child's in that shopping cart with you. They see the chocolate, they cry for it. They make a huge scene because, of course, they know everyone's looking. Okay. And then you offer them, okay, you say to them, okay, stop crying. Then I'll give you the chocolate. That's bribery, right? Because you're offering the item to try to stop that behavior in the moment. However, with positive reinforcement is that the item is only given after the appropriate behavior. So when I'm doing parent training, we go to the grocery store, and I would make sure that mom tells her child, hey, let Johnny, let Sarah know that, hey, Sarah, if we're able to go into the supermarket and there's no crying at all, you know, mommy will give you a chocolate when we leave the store. So you set up that contingency, right? And Sarah will only get the chocolate after she performs, she follows the demands that you're giving her. There's a huge difference there. Okay. So with bribery, the behavior it occurs after the problem behavior has already begun, right? With reinforcement, the other way around. And in bribery, we give the object to stop the behavior short term. However, I always tell parents that they say it works. I gave them my iPad so that way, they don't cry. It stops the behavior short term, but it actually increases the behavior in the long term. Not only does it increase the frequency of the behavior, but it also increases the intensity of the behavior. And that's why we see, kids who are aggressive when they're little. If this isn't done correctly, over time, the child is actually becomes more and more aggressive. And it's harder to deal with that behavior when they're older. Okay. With positive reinforcement, what it does is it increases, it strains, and it maintains that appropriate behavior in the long term. Okay. So a lot more effort is putting in the beginning. However, if you're consistent in it, you'll notice the appropriate behavior is maintained in the long term because you're not reactive to the behavior. You're actually being proactive. You help preventing it from happening. With bribery, we kind of use it as a reaction to the behavior. Okay. And then the last thing I have on here with bribery is it's favorable to the person giving the bribe. Okay. So when you give your child that chocolate to help them stop crying at that checkout line, it's favorable for you because now people aren't looking at you anymore. Your child isn't making a scene. You're able to pay your items and get out of the store. Okay. Well, positive reinforcement is actually favorable to the learner. Okay. Because they know the expectations. You're setting them up for success. Okay. They know that if they behave a certain way, they get the item. Okay. So, this brings us to the end of our discussion. So I hope that each and every one of you leave today learning something. Even if you have children over 5, it's never too late. But research shows that if we intervene early, we can change a child's developmental path and improve outcomes for all children, right? So we have very busy schedules, especially now, with distance learning and you're working from home. I highly suggest that you choose goals like one at a time. Don't overwhelm your child. Okay, so give them simple demands, like work with them on that instructional control. You always have to establish instructional control in the beginning for everything else to kind of follow that. So start with your little ones with simple demands like come here, put on table, give me toys. Those are just examples. They're very easy one-step directions to give, and you're building up that instructional control. Okay, those are really great skills to start with. So, and then think about instead of cleaning up after your child spill, right? Do it with them or allow them to do it on their own. So you're setting the stage now. And if you are overly prompting your child or doing everything for them, that's actually just expectations you're setting for them, right? So it may be okay for kids who are younger than 5, but when they're in middle and high school, it's no longer a thing, and you're going to constantly be cleaning up after them. So I encourage you, involve your child in as many of these activities as you can and to help lay that foundation. So we do have about 10 minutes left. I do want to open for any questions. I know it's a lot of information.
Well, thank you, Han. That was excellent. I want to make sure to mention there's a comment here about different types of rewards. You had mentioned about motivators and rewards, and one of our attendees, wanted to point out that different kids respond to different things. And she mentioned the 5 love languages, how some kids, want to spend time with the family, that time is the love language. For another child, maybe it's play or touch. Do you agree? Do you think that when we think about providing rewards, we should really look at what a child responds to?
Yes, definitely. Again, that goes back to knowing your child best. Some of our kids are more motivated by that intrinsic, you heard the term intrinsic motivation. Some of our kids, they just want that time with that one-on-one time. If you notice, that's something that's going to really motivate your child to do that. I work with a lot of special needs kids who don't have the ability to think that way. So a lot of time I refer to like tangibles as a reinforcer. But with our typically developing children, a lot of it is just going to be your relationship with them. With my 4-year-old, she loves it when I give her that one-on-one attention. Just me sitting there and playing with her. That's all that she wants.
Yeah, exactly. And
yeah,
I think
so I definitely agree with that.
In a way, intrinsic is almost preferred, or it's like the next step, right? For kids who can't respond to the intrinsic, we have to give them tangible stuff, but hopefully we work toward them finding those intrinsic interactions motivating.
Yeah, so a lot of us are able to be at home now, and especially if you have little ones, a lot of moms are able to stay at home with their children, right, during these preschool years. So your relationship with your child is more than rewarding enough. So it could be setting up that contingency. Okay, take 3 more bites, and then mommy's gonna play a game with you, and that's the motivator in itself.
Exactly.
And you're absolutely right. I agree. Find those intrinsic motivation that's going to really bring that out.
Okay. Now we have a question here about whether or not these principles also work with adults. And I always say yes. The principle of behavior
yes.
therapy works, right? No matter what
I can really speak on that. So if I would suggest you read more into this based principles of behavior. And I am, as a behavior analyst, this is our life. This is everything we do in our life. But no one's really sitting down and really breaking that up for you. And, for me, it's like, I never do the dishes. My husband does all the dishes, and that's through positive reinforcement, right? If I'm seeing him doing the dishes, like, wow, I really like how you took the time of cleaning up the kitchen for me. It makes me feel good. I mean, how often do you get praises for that? So if you see your spouse doing something great, make sure you provide that praise. I guarantee you that's going to increase those behaviors. So yes, definitely works with adults.
Now, a very good question here, in terms of providing rewards, how can we make sure in providing rewards that we don't set the child up to expect some kind of reward every time they do something? Specifically, the audience asked about the M&Ms and when a child is cleaning the room. Are we in a way setting the child up for an expectation that every time they clean their room, they're going to get M&Ms? And I can see why parents are kind of worried about that.
Yes. And if, I would recommend that if your child doesn't need that M&M or that iPad, don't go to it right away. You have to read your child. So let's say you give a demand like, hey, Johnny, can you go clean up your room? And if Johnny is saying, no, I don't want to, so then what do? Do you force them to do it? Because that's not what you want to do, right? You want to give some. So there are many ways to go about that. It could be like setting a timer. Okay, it looks like you don't want to do right now. I'm going to set the timer for 3 minutes and I need to do it. But then again, that goes back to like the child in so much control over that, right? So you want to make sure you give the reward. If you know that it's only going to be the M&Ms that's going to reinforce them, use at the beginning. But again, I discussed how like we fade out the reinforcer, right? So once you notice that Johnny is able to show some independence that he's able to do on his own, that that's part of his repertoire already. I wouldn't give him all the M&Ms that he needs. I will fade that away. It could be like giving him choices, right? Do you want to go outside and play? Is that something that's in the moment that he realizes? Like, hey, Johnny, do you want to go outside? And if he says yes, then say, okay, I need you to clean up your toys first, and then we can go outside. But you always think about fading it out. If you're always giving M&Ms, even when Johnny already knows how to clean his room, that's where that dependency is going to come. Okay.
So it sounds like fade it
really
as quickly as you can, right?
Yeah, but you also don't want to fade it so quickly if Johnny hasn't mastered the ability to clean his room yet. So it takes a lot of adjustment. If we really were doing this truly the way that we should be doing it, there's going to be data involved. That's a behavior analyst depends on data, right? Because we look at the pattern, we look at, is Johnny ready to do this on his own, when we can fade that out. Okay, so I would suggest really knowing your child, really reading them and where they're at. If they're able to do some of these skills on their own already, don't reinforce that behavior with a tangible. If it's a new skill that you're developing, you have to increase that motivation. I know it's just like a huge struggle, a huge concept to understand. But research has shown that it's highly effective. Just don't create a dependency on it. Again, that goes back to your ways of thinking, right? Am I bribing my child or am I reinforcing my child?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of us struggle with that concept because we don't want our kids to depend on the reward. But as you said, if the task itself is really challenging, sometimes you do have to provide some really good reward at the end to motivate. So it's a balance. And related to that, I think we have a question here, probably from a teacher. I'm going to read it out to you. How do you manage different reward systems for different kids? Siblings may find it unfair if we reward a child for doing something pretty basic. So the sibling may find it unfair. Classmates might tease the child, right, for needing a reward. It may hurt the child's self-esteem. Any suggestions about that? I think maybe it's kind of two different questions. Sounds like in the classroom setting, how do we not embarrass a child for needing a reward? And then also in terms of fairness, at home, with siblings, how come when Johnny cleans the room, he gets M&Ms and I don't? What do you think,
Tom? Yeah, so I can answer both. So my 2-year, let's start with at home first. Okay, so my 2-year and 4-year-old, when I first introduce a lot of these skills to Kendra, I know M&M is something that's going to work for her. So I would set up the contingency. Hey, Kendra, how many M&Ms do you want to earn? And she'll always say 5. Okay. So I'm like, great, you want to earn 5 M&Ms? I need you to pick up all the toys in the living room and put it in the bin. And then my 2-year-old, who is super verbal as my 4-year-old, she hears that and she's like, I want M&Ms, M&Ms. And I say, okay, Kira, you want M&Ms too? You can pick up all the toys with Kendra too, and you can get 1 M&Ms. Can you see the difference? I'm still making sure that I'm acknowledging her that she is part of this as well, but it's also a skill that I'm teaching her as well. So the difference may be, Kendra's getting 5 M&Ms, but Kira's getting 1 M&M, right? So I'm still giving that reward. And the great things about the little ones is that, most of them don't really care about the actual numbers of M&Ms. They're just caring that they're getting acknowledged for doing something positive. So acknowledgement is huge. But in that, I always really make sure that my praises are much more than what the M&Ms that I'm giving them. Okay. Mm-hmm. And it just takes a lot of time and a lot of practice, to be honest with you. Because sometimes I'm giving the demand of like cleaning up and I'm not even presenting the M&Ms as an option, and then to see where they go with that, where do they take that, because if a child is like, if she's gonna look at me and said, where's M&M? After I give it, that tells me that, okay, I'm not doing something right. This is where I know you're only doing it because you want the M&Ms. Okay, so it gets a little tricky. I think if you have like a behavior specialist at your school or somewhere, I really encourage you to reach out and kind of have these discussions with them. For parents, your I don't know what resources. Yeah, I know with our kids who are typically developing, you guys don't get a lot of resources. And that's the unfortunate thing. I was going to say, go to your pediatrician, but even then, they're not going to give you the recommendation that you need. A lot of it's like on your own kind of thing. But I hope I opened kind of this door for you to really think
Yeah.
about that. The key of
Yeah,
all
I
is
mean, I think
that
there's a lot to learn when it comes to, something as simple as a reward system,